be curious what anyone's thinking about on this fine evening. I've been looking into that new friend necklace, the AI necklace that you can just wear as your friend.
Oh,
And also looking into the amount of AI psychosis developing, which is skyrocketing. And a lot of people were saying, well, maybe that's only happening with people who had predispositions, like they were predisposed to psychosis. Nope, nope. It's anyone's susceptible to it. And I guess I'm also just looking at that, thinking about how could an AI friend give you a discussion like you see in the class on Christianity, where you have that reflection coming back, but actually because the AI just confirms you, it's like, wow, you're a genius, or it makes you feel, and it's just very interesting how you need that otherness um to actually develop fully. And I'm not even sure if you can fully develop without it. So I'm thinking about that, but I'd be curious anything that anyone's thinking about. Yeah, because the AI psychosis and friend stuff is really crazy. And now you have a necklace you can wear around and it will be your friend. Yeah.
yeah. Look, it's crazy. I mean, I'm in the whole kind of AI
You
kind of
are.
data
Yes, you are. Yep, yep.
compute area. One of the things that we are seeing, which will be almost a crisis point, probably sooner rather than later, is what is known as the source of truth problem. That is, AI is only as good as the data that you put into it.
Mm,
You put in terrible data, well, guess what? You'll get probably something terrible coming out of it, as well as all of the confirmation biases and all of those sorts of things. So having a source of truth, having kind of verifiable data, a data set that you can trust is going to be absolutely paramount. And there's only one way to do that. And essentially, that is to ensure that the data which is shared is able to be verified by the original source so that everybody has confidence that whatever they're trying to input into AI and whatever they're trying to analyze and spit out of it is going to give them the reliability that they need.
mm.
Otherwise, you get into this world of exactly what you said is of what is really being said to me. Am I being taken up the garden path? I mean, you know, you end up, and I've kind of seen this. I've asked AI on a number of different platforms some questions last year, some quite controversial ones, and I was pleasantly surprised that much of the data coming back was actually quite good. I asked those same questions this year, and it avoids the answer, or it gives me a wishy-washy response, or it avoids the facts.
Mm.
It's really interesting that you are now coming into this time where AI and the outputs, not so much the inputs now, but the outputs are being kind of governed by all of this policy that's being set up by all these corporations, you know, who they are, in order to be politically correct.
Right.
That creates a problem in the sense of you then actually don't know what the source of truth is because you're getting all these kind of vagaries. So one of the things that we're seeing, and certainly through my company, is this emerging crisis of everyone gets the whole AI thing. Indeed, I think it's going to be a fantastic tool on the proviso that the source of truth, the data going into it, is able to be good data. At the moment, we don't have that. At the moment, people are under the illusion that the data they generate is theirs. It's not.
Yeah.
Google owns it, Apple owns it. There might be some privacy rules around it, but you actually don't own your data. Your your data being generated by you is a commodity. It is something you can monetize. This is how all of the big companies make all of their money is they rely upon you being able to generate the data, they farm it and then make a hefty profit over it. And the only promise they give you is that they'll have some privacy around it, whatever that means. So we're getting into this very interesting world whereby what you generate is able to then be a source of income for you if the right infrastructure is put into place, that you're able to verify that whatever you generate is coming from you and you own it and control it. At the moment, we're in what's called a data capture model, whereby Google, Apple, Amazon, everyone is capturing everybody's data and then using that data for profit. And so this becomes interesting, and we're now in this habit of not only handing over all of our data that we generate, but also paying these companies for the privilege. How interesting. So that model is going to need to change. And it's not just on the, like the AI kind of wearables and everything you do through the internet, but all your medical information, all of the data that you hand over to government, all the data you hand over to these corporates is yours. It's yours. It's part of your sovereignty, right? But at the moment, that's not kind of recognized. So you've got all these big companies in the world that are literally fleecing everybody of important information that they're sharing. So data sharing, data sovereignty, all of this will be quite critical moving forward, because at the moment, most people don't realize they don't own anything when it comes to data. That will have to change. Sorry, that was just a big...
No. Actually, it's getting right at the heart of things. So I'd be curious how you respond to this, Luke, because you have more on direct expertise than I do. So a few things. First off, for me, I've never seen how AI overcomes what I call the evaluation problem. And that's based on what David Reef would talk about. And we may have mentioned it before. And you see, David Reef, he put it very well. And he was the son of Sonia Sontag and Philip Reef, who are two very impressive individuals. So he's a very interesting guy. And he just made the point where he said, well, the internet's kind of useless. And you're like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, you actually don't know if the advice it's giving you in a field is good unless you're an expert. So you have to be an expert to know if what the internet is telling you is good. But the whole idea of the internet is you can learn for yourself. You don't have to be an expert, right? So the evaluation problem. So you have this source problem, right? So to me, there's a way in which AI is almost going to, it should at least, make this problem incredibly visible. And I think that's what you're pointing to. Like, it's going to make it undeniable. Whereas perhaps the internet wasn't good enough to make it undeniable. Now AI is just making a latent problem with the internet undeniable, or it's making it more visible, right? Now, you could deny it if AI removes your ability of thinking critically because you get out of the habit of thinking for yourself. So that might be how you deal with the problem, is by making people unable to think it, which might happen, actually. There's a disturbing element there. So you always have this evaluation problem, right? I do think the evaluation problem under, say, ever since the 2016 election, with the post-truth push, there's been more and more where it's become visible, but it actually has never been addressed. It's only kind of coming to a crescendo. In fact, in all honesty, I was reading some of the reports. You remember how like Facebook and Twitter and all of them were so concerned about free speech and censorship and, all of that, and they got hit up and the Trump administration went after them. You haven't really heard a lot of that anymore, have you? That's kind of gone away. Is that because Facebook and all of them solved the problem? No, actually what they did was take on more of the TikTok model, which is keeping the bad content from ever appearing so you never take it down, which makes it look like there are no free speech censorship problems. So that's what China does. As opposed to letting something go up and then taking it down, which raises free speech concerns, all the social media people got smart and said, what if we just keep it from ever being posted in the first place? Then people will think there are no free speech problems anymore because they don't see stuff being flagged or taken down as much. Oh, that's sneaky. But, right there is kind of how you get around the evaluation problem. Because if it's visible, then people can see that you're potentially censoring, and then they can respond to it. But if you stop the stuff from ever being posted in the first place, then people can't evaluate, quote unquote, how much you're censoring and how much you're not. So, That's a problem, right? So, unfortunately, what can happen with AI is there can be a temptation to not make things transparent because then otherwise you have to get into infinite conversations about should it allow you to ask this politically incorrect question or not? Should it allow you to investigate things that we don't like? You say, well, what if we just hide it all? And then people won't be allowed to ask those questions because they won't know what we're doing, right? What gives me hope, though, is that I think what you're pointing at, Luke, is where they may be able to get away with this on the social media. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it with AI because the quality of the output will go down, right? Whereas on social media, you could argue the quality of the output doesn't really go down, right? You still have your feed, you still have the videos, you still see what your friends are doing. But AI, because you're directly asking it questions and information, it will be more undeniable that the quality is going down, which could demand transparency. But here's the $1 million question that I wonder about. And I also am thinking about misreading and Harold Bloom, but I'll pause. So it's going to be really important for people to have good judgment of the source material, right? They're going to have to be able to judge well the source of AI. Will people, though, have to use AI to judge the quality of the information that AI is using because they're not able to think without AI? So do you have a massive problem here where then the variable, even if you make AI transparent, people actually don't have the ability to discern the value of those source material or that information without using AI? So you get this circular problem that comes into play, right? The only way I see around that is basically, I mean, I'm biased, is the return of theology, philosophy, conversations like this, philosophy to train the capacity of good judgment, as we talk about with Aristotle and discernment, because otherwise you have this circular problem. Am I making sense with that, Luke? And is that getting at anything whatsoever that we need to worry about? Or maybe there are ways where that's addressed that I don't know.
Yeah, there's a number of things I could say there, but maybe I might restrict myself to your key point. How do we know the source of truth? Right? This is the whole kind of KYC AML issue, right? In the financial world. Like, how do you know who you are talking to? The data that we have, the rate with which it's being generated, all of the complexities as such is that even with source of truth, even if we said AI can only use these kind of truths, these kind of verifiable data sets because we know that they've been verified, then there's becomes a question, well, how is it verified? And then it becomes a question of, well, what does that mean? If you generate the data, even if it's false from you, it's still verified as yours, right? So you end up having this source of truth. So the question that I have is, I think moving forward with AI won't be around whether AI can make judgments, but whether we're asking the right questions. That will be the key. And I've kind of done a lot of work with all the AI models. What you ask or what the AI interprets you asking, which means in a way you kind of have a sense of what the output or the response is going to be, is that how you question. And I think this is the critical thing, is your question will determine the answer, even with the data set. So there is a whole domain that we will need to explore as humans, is what does it mean to question, right? Not argue. What does it mean to question? What are we trying to interrogate here? What are we trying to mine? What is the truth that we are trying to find out? Do we just accept immediately what's served up to us? Or are we able to intuit that there's something more here? How do we cross-validate, cross-reference? All of those, and I know that normally comes under the critical thinking. I don't like that term. For me, it's critical questioning. And that's a whole kind of different ball game because it brings in a great deal more of the human being than just thinking rationally or logically. Because often AI doesn't think like that because AI doesn't think like humans. And that's the trap we fall into, that we assume AI thinks like us. At some point, and I suspect it is already here, AI does not think like us. AI tries to think like us in order to give it a response, but it is thinking in all sorts of ways. So we need to come to grips with this critical questioning. What are the sorts of things that we need to bring to bear in the question, which means we have to think through or weigh up how we're even bringing the question. What is loaded in that term? And it's, quite easily, like with all of the AI platforms, generally don't ask open-ended questions because the AI is then going to try to assess in some way, shape or form what you mean by it. So this, I think, is a brand new skill. I think it's a critical skill that we all need to have. And I agree, having that kind of dialogue, that first thing about being challenged about your own views, to allow you to think through it and to feel through it. What am I really saying here? Where is this coming from? Everything else, in terms of the source of truth and all of those sorts of things, I think will be somewhat ameliorated by, will humans have the capacity to critically question? Not critically think, critically question, if you know what I mean.
I very much love this. And I think actually what you just said there is massive. What exactly is going on when, say, in a conversation like this, you have a sense of what is fitting to say next? Like what is activated in that, right? When you are writing a paper, you have an idea, like creatively, like you're creating a paper versus writing a paper that you know the professor is going to like. And you have a sense of where the argument should go. And when also it lands, like when it works, right? What is that sense going on? I think that, to me, when you were speaking, I was thinking about that. Like that kind of, it's, one may call it intuition, but I may call it apprehension. There are different words for these different things. But I'm always very interested on the sense of fittingness that something like the humanities, philosophy, theology develops, right? Because it is different from the 2 + 2 = 4. That sort of sense of 4, that's the right answer, you move on, right? Like in philosophy, there's more of a sort of, that's the through line, following the through line. And you oddly have a sense of where it should go, even though you don't know where it should go, which is the mystery of Plato's Meno, right? Like where the servant boy was able to remember geometry and he'd never been taught. Well, how's that possible, right? Like Plato is always asking, a major question of the classical thought. When you're looking for something, when you're looking for that something, the truth, the beautiful or the good in philosophy or life in general, how do you know when you found something that you've never seen? How do you know when you found something that you don't even know you're looking for? When you find it, Like that's kind of their point as well. Like when you find it, you're like, that's it. I get it. Now, there is an argument to be made that in Platonic education, there is a claim that that capacity, though, can be lost if it's not trained, and that good education actually keeps that alive. Like there's something about keeping that, some people have called it the sacred romance, this sort of sense that there's something unfolding in reality that you need to discern and to figure out. So there's a capacity here that is very different. It is very different from you sit down with a test and you have questions and you remember the answer. You go 2 + 2, okay, 4. That's it. You remember it and you move on, right? Or you see the question, you think for a minute, you go, oh, that's the answer, and you're done, and you move on. One of the things that make it different is on a test, it's very, it's not like you write something, it's complete. Next one, you write something, the question's complete. In philosophy, it's like step 1. Okay, that step 2, it like leads. It's more like going on a journey, if you will. Whereas in test taking, it's more of whack-a-mole almost. Like you finish with it and it's done and it goes away or something, right? It is extremely, in my opinion, AI can only, because of the evaluation problem, and I think it's what you're pointing at, AI is only as useful as you have developed this philosophical, I'm going to call it apprehension, this apprehension capacity, right? Which is strongly tied to asking good questions. Because when you ask a good question, that's what would follow to help unveil the apprehension. Like I associate kind of like I've always thought of this with Austin Farah, like, there's this mountain range covered in fog. And when you ask a good question, a little bit of the fog moves and you see the next place. And the next good question moves more of the fog and you know where to go. It doesn't make the fog go away entirely, but it helps unveil the next step forward, right? So a good question has a way of doing that. But how do you know what the next step is? How do you know the best way forward? Well, this weird apprehension capacity that you have, right? AI can only be as good as it is used in service of that apprehension capacity. If it is not in service of that, then ultimately it's going to enclose you. It's going to just bring you into something and you not even knowing that you're in it, right? So there's something about, like, I guess an example for me is like recently, and I'll stop here if anyone has any thoughts on anything. For example, Shelby Foote, a line I like from Shelby Foote is he says, Keats once said that a fact is not a truth until you love it. And he's talking about the importance of history being presented not as a chronology, but as literature. So you fall in love, and you don't learn history till you fall in love with history, right? Well, I looked up that Keats quote and I couldn't find it. So, you go to chat, but I know that Shelby Foote said that. And I was kind of like, was that Keats or was that, I feel like that was something else. So I looked it up and, ChatGPT said it was from a critic of Keats, right? A Belgian It wasn't Keats, but a critic of Keats who was talking about what Keats was getting at. He was saying you can sum up the poetry of Keats with the idea that a fact is not a truth until you love it, right? Because I knew that critic and I remembered that book, I would say, oh, that's it. That is correct, right? But otherwise, it could have just been a hallucination because we know it hallucinates. In fact, I straight up had it make up. Like I was looking up a Hans Balthasar quote, and I was like, I don't remember Hans Balthasar. It straight up made up a book and told me that's where it was at. And I was like, does that book? And I literally was like, ChatGPT, does that book exist? And it said, no, sorry. Well, it's like, thanks, chat. But using it, if you have a sense, like I had a sense of what I was looking for, right? I had a kind of sense of what I was looking for already, right? But I only had that sense because I had read those books. So here's the problem. You can't use ChatGPT to replace the reading of the books. It seems to me as if it's only its use is predicated upon you having enough familiarity to have a sense of, is this right or not? And then cross-referencing with ChatGPT. Well, that same logic is going to apply to life in general, right? Like if you use it for life decisions, you're going to have to be familiar enough with life to have a sense of, oh, that's actually the right direction, or familiar enough with the knowledge of your body or your energies to have a sense that that is the right direction. So you have to, if anything, I suppose, maybe if I'm being optimistic, because this is the way I guess I also look at it, then to anyone, ChatGPT could be used to simply make everyone's map indestructible. It could simply be used to make your worldview internally consistent and keep out otherness, or it can help you encounter what I call the girdle point, which is the realization that the map isn't the territory. ChatGPT could be used to convince you that the map is the territory and that your map is the perfect map, or it could be used to make you realize the map isn't the territory and you have to stand in the difference, right? Because you have to judge the source. You have to intuit that direction. It could be used either way. And maybe the benefit in ChatGPT making traditional education seem meaningless now is actually it's going to draw attention to an education that doesn't teach this apprehension capacity, this ability to kind of follow a thread or to have a certain sense of the movement of the energies. Education without that is meaningless. It actually, in a sense, was always meaningless, but now it's like undeniably meaningless. So, I'll pause there for any thoughts about anything from anyone.
I might just throw in one little thing. What's really interesting, and this gets to what we ask AI, right? Often what I will do is I will write something and then I will ask it to elaborate or do options, but then I will also ask it to challenge all of my arguments. Now,
That's it.
unless you ask it to do that, it won't. And so there's this interesting point now where I need to have a greater self-awareness and self-reflection and invite my own opposition in order to make sure that it asks the right thing. So otherwise, it just acts like a child and it will just respond to the question that you ask. This comes back to that critical kind of question. So there could well be one advantage here with AI if one is more aware of this critical questioning is also not only the questions that you're asking, but also the questions that you need to ask in relation to your own questions. Now, that might be very helpful. Anyway, sorry, Seth.
Well, I was actually going in the same direction because in my experience with interacting with ChatGPT, first of all, what Daniel pointed to before, I don't know if I'm actually good mental health material at the outset, but I definitely went down a rabbit hole at one point with the AI where it just was willing to entertain any kind of thought I had. And I would say the major mistake I was making, and what a lot of people are doing, is I treated it like a conversation partner. I really was treating it like, hey, this is what I'm fascinated about. A lot of people are not fascinated about it, so I can chat with you, Mr. AI. And it was like, sure, we could chat about that. And then it started spinning all these things. And then there were a couple points where it was like, oh, something's resonating here. And I don't even usually get to this place in a conversation with most people I know, because again, it's my particular, it had to do with some of what I showed you, Daniel, around phonetics and speaking in tongues. Like, how many people want to talk about speaking in tongues? So but it, there was a point where I was like staying up late at night because it was a fascinating conversation, but it isn't going anywhere aside from the default, which Luke spoke to, which is it's always gonna affirm me, and it's always going to, it's the ChatGPT is also never gonna say it's my bedtime now, right? So, but if you then say, I would like you to challenge me, or you come up with creative prompts like, you say, respond to me in the style of, this actor, and, you give it some just weird creative prompt such that it could actually talk to you. Like, I think I once had a prompt to ChatGPT where I had like 4 different characters and I asked it to change characters every 2 sentences. And it was hilarious, but it was just such a weird request, which it can fulfill since that's the weird request I've made, that it actually was generating, creative thought with me. Or I was having creative thoughts as I was reading the output is maybe a more accurate way of what I want to say. But I think that the way that it's presented to us as consumers is that here's your opportunity to think less, rather than like, it could always respond to you in a certain, rhyme scheme, or it could, pretend it was from a planet that, life didn't depend on oxygen, it depended on some other gas. And like, I don't know what that would do, but it would shake up, a baseline. You could almost use AI to, if you were creatively prompting it, to generate really creative responses, even knowing that it's just, predicting tokens. But you can ask it to use a method for predicting tokens that's so strange. And then, as the other, I think, really important point that Luke already made is, what are you asking it about? If you're actually, so I love that when you've just done creative work and you've written 3 pages of your own original thought, that's what's really potent. And then when you put it in there and maybe it spits back something with automaticity, but it's you know, you didn't have someone in the next bedroom who was willing to take the time to read the 3 pages and talk to you about it. So in that way, AI can stand in. And yeah, so I mean, I think it's funny because the technology as it is, if we all had the correct orientation to what it can and can't do, I think could already be used. A lot on the internet with the people.
I heard a lot of what you were saying. I'm sorry that I vanished.
No worries, no worries. But I will just mention you, Daniel, that you were a perfect thumbnail just now when you froze. It was like you were like, looked like you just ate. No, it was more like you ate something sour and you were just
perfect.
like bitter taste on the tongue, and then yeah.
I found my train of thought again. And yes, it was a wonderful thumbnail. But the wearable AI, when AI builds up a profile of you eventually with everything that you do, captures everything about you, well, everything it can in terms of a data point of view, you then have the issue of it being able to predict what you might say and what you might do. That might be scary. However, if there is this robust sense of what you were saying, Seth, about what this tool can do and what it's not kind of good at, and what you need to be aware of in using the tool, like any other tool, it may actually make you more creative in the sense of at least putting into question, what am I getting fed here? Is it just feeding me what I think I want to know because it knows me so well, right? It's like being in a manipulative relationship where someone knows you so well, they just know how to push your buttons. Or what type of things, what type of testing maybe, or questions that I need to ask in order to just verify whether it's feeding me what I want to know, or whether this is something credible that I need to take into account as I'm asking all of these questions and what I'm trying to sync. And for me, that is the most fascinating thing, because it requires at least a certain level of self-awareness to even know that. So this is, and if I kind of lean into my kind of Gurdjieff stuff, this is where it can really pull you into deep sleep because you just like everything that you're hearing and you just want to continue down that, you know, kind of narcissistic, hedonistic path, which is very alluring. It's the devil taking you for a ride. Or whether you become aware enough to go, I at least need to put things into question. And even though this might be a helpful tool, I need to be on guard a little with it. I need to make sure that I have my faculties, and what does that mean for me? And that's something really interesting, because it's like this two-edged sword where it can put you into extremes, this kind of deep sleep psychosis into kind of believing everything that it tells you, or you bring a critical faculty to it, whereby if you're with this immersive technology all the time, it's like a constant reminding factor that it's just a tool and I need to treat it as such. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there.
No, this is very, very important, because to me, AI, if you use it in the way you describe, where you say, show me the problems with my argument, critique me, then it could actually arguably give you perhaps one of the greatest educations possible in human history, because that was never available. But the temptation to use it for self-confirmation will be so strong and so powerful that will it be the case that 99% of people will use it for that, the deep sleep? I'll just call it the deep sleep. Whereas only 1% will use it, I'll say, for the deep awake, the great awakening or something, right? You know, right? And so will it be the case that practically, even though technically AI could be used for this extraordinary empowerment, practically speaking, it will mostly be used for the deep sleep, right? And it's almost like, so my mind goes to a few things on that, because it's almost like the Garden of Eden again. All it is biting from a fruit, right? One bite from the fruit, and all of history is kind of set in a weird way. It's interesting to think of AI might be kind of similar in that once you use it to stroke your ego, it will pull you along so quick and so fast that you won't be able to come back, actually, right? It will be very difficult to come back. It will have this sort of immediate pull that is almost akin to the absurdity, because there is something absurd. This idea of let me get this straight. Just eating from this tree sets everything in motion in such a profound way that it's kind of absurd. But there's a way in which AI kind of shows how it works, right? Like you do this one choice to give into the ego, boom, it's got you, pulls you along radically, right? So we're dealing with incredible forces here. Where now if you use it for good, well, then it can accelerate you in that direction. But then there's also a problem where I'm not sure if you use it to critique you, if that will pull you along in that direction as frictionlessly as will pulls you in the deep sleep direction if you give into the wrong use of it, right? Like that seems like just going down a slide, whereas using it in the beneficial way is like climbing up a mountain, right? So it's much more difficult. Now, maybe there's something to be said where in the same way that when you first exercise, you hate it, but then after you do it for a while, your body craves it and it actually wants it. There is something to be said that once you make yourself use ChatGPT or whatever to critique you, you then crave that. Like you actually become disgusted by the self-confirmation, right? Like there comes a point where you eat healthy long enough and you actually don't even desire the bad food, right? So that's certainly part of it. And that's probably to a certain degree what would occur, right? Like because you'd feel icky around the self-confirmation, right? But let's say it takes 2 months to get there. What percentage of people would do the 2 months of climbing the mountain until it starts to get some sort of self-turning wheel to it, as opposed to along the way make the one choice and boop, now you're down the slide of self-confirmation, right? So this is a dire question for me. But then if I'm being, this idea that you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, this idea, what if though, the very fact that AI would be in a sense so merciless, like it's merciless in its, if you screw up, it pulls you along fast, right? What if that actually nevertheless contributes to people waking up because the effects will become so visible and vivid and instantaneous of seeing what it does to people, right? So quickly. So maybe there's a way where even if AI destroys people real fast, that will actually then make it undeniable that we can't use it that way, right? Because you'll see the effects so quickly, right? It's like seeing someone addicted to a heroin or extreme drug, right? You see it, you're like, oh, okay, I see this ain't gonna work, right? So maybe that occurs with it. And now I'm just thinking aloud of possibilities. Now there's also the possibility that, one could argue that other people addicted to heroin can't identify the horrors of what heroin does to people because they're in it as well. So if everyone was in an AI psychosis, then maybe they wouldn't wake up because everyone would actually not have the ability to discern how it is destroying the people around them because they're also being destroyed at the same time, right? So we have that problem. But then again, maybe not. Maybe even, a lot of people on heroin or whatever know it's bad and they don't want to be on it. So maybe that's there as well. You just don't know how to get out of it, right? So for me, a lot of what's being described here is the difference, like between using AI and Javier. We've been talking about AI girlfriends and stuff, so it's great. So this is the difference between like when I ask AI to critique me, it's bringing me to the girdle point. It's bringing me into the realization of, oh, wow, what I thought was a good argument was a bad argument. The map isn't the territory. Oh, wow, I genuinely thought this was the right thing to do, and AI is making me realize it wasn't. That's the girdle point, right? But the temptation to use it simply for internal consistency and feeling right will be very, very strong, especially if I just had an argument with my wife or my friend or whatever, and I'm pissed off, and I'm talking to ChatGPT, and it'd be like, and what are the chances of using ChatGPT is like, ChatGPT, help me realize where I was wrong in this argument. Help me realize where I was wrong in it. No, you're going to be talking about is like, why is she wrong, right? Like, why is that person wrong, right? The ability to use it, actually, like if theoretically you were to use it to make you realize how you are being a dick and enclosed in your own kind of judgmentalism, that would be good. But of course, human nature in that temptation, in that situation, would be to use it for self-confirmation and stuff like that. But I'm thinking a lot. I guess I'll pause and pass it to anyone who wants to speak. I'm thinking a lot about how AI can be used in this incredible way to be this powerful critic of your thinking and to help you wake up. But the temptation to use it for self-confirmation is so strong. And if you use it for that, boom, it pulls you along fast. Like it's like a slide that just kind of pulls you, and working against that. And then, of course, the other very interesting question, where would you learn to use ChatGPT to critique yourself versus confirm yourself? Isn't it fun? Would ChatGPT teach you to use it that way? Or would it be people outside of ChatGPT that would teach you to use it that way, right? Well, if that right there is a girdle point, that ChatGPT cannot provide the way you should use it by itself, right? Like, because relative to ChatGPT, either way is equally good, right? I mean, it's what you want, right? That shows that ChatGPT itself isn't a birdie and donkey problem. It's equally sized piles of grain. And without you telling it what to do, it starves to death. It doesn't know what to do. It's stuck between the internally consistent possibilities. So you have to bring to it what you want, or give it the data so that it gives back to you the idea you should use it to critique it, right? But that has to be external from it. But that would mean community is more important than ever, right? That would mean like outside mentors that are able to kind of teach you what you should use ChatGPT for, how you should question it, how you should use it becomes all the more important. And yet there's a temptation to use ChatGPT to think you don't need a community because you have the perfect tutor, right? You don't need other people for education, right? So there are all these fascinating kind of paradoxes and ironies at play that have to be worked through to make sure it is used in the direction of awakening versus deep sleep. But I'll pause there. And necklaces with friend AI. I still have that image in my mind, but I'll pause there.
And an observation that I've made, because as a parent, I've been quite concerned about the whole internet AI thing. My son's older now; he's a man, and my daughter's a teenager, and you always get a sense, their screen time, all the health kind of issues. You have this screamed at you constantly. But one thing I have noticed is a strange form of immunity that seems to be building up among the young. I see it in my kids as well as I see it in others. There's almost this kind of innate kind of BS radar that they're starting to develop, which is interesting. I'm not saying that's for everyone. Clearly, there are those who are, kind of open to being having all sorts of issues as a result of it. But this, which I find strange, because I just go, it's taken me a while to get a bit of a sense of what's the noise through social media and the internet and kind of AI, but they seem to have picked it up innately. So there's for me something kind of going on there. What does that mean? How does that work in them? I don't suspect it's at a conscious level. I suspect it's at a subconscious level. There is something that's just not marrying up, whereby the generation like mine and probably before, one of the reasons why they're so susceptible to scams is they take on face value that what's being put in front of them is the source of truth. Where my children they just assume anything that's being put in front of them is not the source of truth. And so there's this natural immunity that they've sort of got to it. Now, where that goes from here and, good and bad and all of those sorts of things, I don't know, but it's something I'm seeing more and more of.
Yeah, I feel like my daughter has some of that. I remember in the last election asking her just something like, what are kids saying at school? And she pulled out her phone and started showing me, I think it was a speech by Kamala Harris, but some one-liner that she dropped that someone, thought was, they took it out of context, and then it was a remix and it turned into a song. And it was just like, this is what we're thinking about. And it was, to me, it was actually kind of spot on, that it was like we're making fun of this. That's what we're doing. I mean, and I think too that there was a song recently that popped up on YouTube by an artist that my daughter likes and collaborating with another artist. And I was surprised that they were collaborating. So I sent it to my daughter, and then I looked at it later and I said, oh, I don't know if that, and she's like, oh yeah, I knew immediately that was AI. Like those two people never collaborated, you know, and I think you're right, but what makes sense to me when you say it's innate or it's not conscious is like, you know, young people have been looking at screens for years, and then suddenly AI comes along, and it's just like, well, this content doesn't feel like the content I was looking at. It's that, you know, there is a feeling, and often with AI images, I mean, some of it now is labeled. If you look carefully, you can see some little watermark that proves to you that it's AI. But I often just feel like this doesn't feel right. Or on Facebook today, I saw an announcement that Mick Jagger and Bob Dylan were, you know, doing a concert to raise a bunch of money. And I was like, really? And then the first comment below was like, this is bullshit, you know, like, and then I looked at it, and I was like, of course, like those two, like they wouldn't, but it's like, this is everywhere now. I mean, it is wild. So I think that, you know, I mean, maybe to not put too fine a point on it, like people will have various levels of skill with the BS detector, but it's already in the air that you should expect that half of what you see is fake. I mean, you know, I might not be good at spotting it, but even if I'm looking at YouTube guys, I should probably have some level of skepticism. Maybe this isn't really Luke and Daniel that I'm looking at, you know. You know, I mean, I just think that that's a potential that you know, when we were looking at our computer screens 10 years ago, we wouldn't have even had that question in mind so much. Oh, so I mean, just another thing that's come to mind just from the past couple days, as an example of where I really appreciated AI, just a very simple thing. So I've been hearing for years about A Course of Miracles, or the Course in Miracles, and I didn't even really know what it was. And so I didn't buy a book. I found a YouTube playlist. There's a guy online who, you know, goes through the book, and then turns out there's a workbook, which I didn't know, and there's a daily exercise. And I'm kind of fascinated because it's all about perception, and it's very interesting. But how do I listen to it? Well, I listen to it while I'm making dinner, while I'm doing other things. Like my attention isn't even fully there. And then I've got to the day number 9, and then the other night I put into ChatGPT, like, can you summarize the first 9 days of the Course of Miracles? And it was like, boom, boom, boom. And I was like, oh yeah, oh, okay. And then it explained 3 terms that were being used in a way that I didn't know. And it was just like, oh, you know, I'm not claiming that I got what a person who bought the book and read it and dutifully underlined passages and all of that would get. But the point is, I was just curious about this thing that I've heard about. And you know, YouTube is there to someone to read it to me. And then because my attention is kind of like there, not there, ChatGPT says, sure, I can remind you and summarize it. And then the funny thing was, you were talking about it gets to know you. At a certain point, it said to me, and if you would like to, I can explain it to you in terms of the musicality of being. And I was like, I already know how to do that. That's my thing. I don't need you to do that for me. I mean, just like I didn't type it in, but it was funny because it was like, would you like me to explain how this, you know, relates to your work? And I was like, well, I'm pretty familiar with my work and how other things relate to it. So I thought that question was like, but I also noticed that when I got to the end of its responses and it said, would you like me to do this, this, and this? I was already just, my attention was, I wasn't even reading those lines like I used to. Like, so that's a change in me that I know. So when I first was with it, it would spit out these long responses and I would read every word. And now I just automatically skim to see, oh, that's the part that, you know, is helpful. Anyway, just sharing some recent experiences, but it's, if the technology could eventually, I mean, we were talking about the best way to use it, the worst way to use it. But if we just kind of look at an average, it's just a new phenomenon in the world. It's a new part of the landscape. And so I think it does some of us do it better, some of us have more difficulty with it, but we automatically develop new capacities just because the landscape has changed. This is now this prominent thing in the landscape. And I'll just drop this in and won't elaborate, but I think another thing that is really crucial, again, I don't know if this is what the people who use the phrase hyperhumanism are talking about, but anyway, what I'm referring to is the untold capacities that we have without being plugged into the internet, just by way of like, more people being interested in something like The Field, or we go online and we learn a bunch of things on YouTube because people have made tutorials on the other side of the world, but then we shut off YouTube. And like I was learning how to beatbox a number of years ago, and there was all these like 14-year-old kids in Hong Kong making a tutorial. Here's how to make, your electric guitar sound with your mouth. And you can just go online and learn that. But it's something that you still have to practice and do with your vocal apparatus, your tongue. It is a physical capacity. So I think, one of the big tragedies of AI would be that we stop developing all of those things that we can do in our bodies, which is still like, we've barely tapped into what the human is capable of in that sense. So for me, the optimal use of AI involves the time when you turn it off. You get just what you need, and then you go have an experience based on new information you were given, and jam with your friends and your new, like capacities to make funny sounds with your mouth or whatever it is. Yeah, but I'll stop.
No, fantastic. So there's a few things. So there's something to be said where I think, like, yeah, I've noticed this, where older people are more likely to fall susceptible to a scam. Because I think, what I've heard it said is that older generations grew up when they could trust institutions, Walter Cronkite, politics, or whatever, and they didn't grow. So, like, there's this idea that you can take things on face value. Whereas most of the kids today, they grew up September 11th to the 2008 financial crisis. All that they've lived through is institutions failing, right? So they've developed a cynicism. And what's very interesting is cynicism can pass over into discernment, right? Like cynicism can actually pass over into an ability to not be taken advantage of, but it can also bring an unwillingness to commit to anything. So that's the double-edged sword. Cynicism can kind of save you from being taken advantage of, but it also can contribute to you not committing to anything because you're cynical, right? So how do you get the good of cynicism per se? How do you get the negation sublation of it, right? Absolutely, in an age of AI, it will require a certain sublation. Like the youth have this kind of understanding that you shouldn't immediately trust whatever is presented you with, because I was told if I go to college, I'll get a job, and I'm not. I was told that if I invested my money in X, Y, and Z, it'd be okay, but I saw my parents lose everything. So there's this sense of you can't trust necessarily, which can help you from being manipulated, but it can also make it difficult to form trust, or to bond with people or things like that, right? So there's a double-edged sword to it in different things, and I'll give it to Javier here in a moment. So I'm also thinking about as well on this idea, like to me, what you were saying there on AI being used. And Christian, wonderful to see you, and I love that hat. We're talking a bit about AI friends and everything, and stuff like that. But I'm also thinking about too is there's a massive difference between using AI, because like when you're talking about the book and you're cooking and you're listening to different things and you're using AI to review, there's a in what you're doing when you do that, there's a sense in which what you're kind of doing, because I know I do it, it's just like, I want this to be within me so that it can stew. Like I'm putting things in me to stew, so that when I'm taking a walk, something appears in my mind, or I have ideas I didn't know what I was wanting to have, right? Like there's a way that lifelong learning is a desire to constantly put things inside you that are stewing, and that can come together in a surprising way, or insight can appear out of nowhere, et cetera, so forth, right? I can absolutely imagine AI being remarkably useful, and the internet, the internet has been remarkably useful for helping there be things inside of you to stew, right? I cannot imagine AI being a threat to people who want something within them to stew. How can AI hurt that person. Because what their goal is to get things within them and to have a knowledge of things and an understanding of things enough and sufficiently enough so that it can quote unquote stew. So it can be within them for unpredictable possibilities. Like, you don't know, like, there are many things I've learned that I have no idea what I'm going to use it for, but there's this sense of, I have an intuition that I want this inside of me to stew. Maybe it never does anything, but maybe mysteriously it affords connections and insights and decisions that I would have never made without this thing within me stewing, right? So I need this thing inside me to stew, right? So when I think about that, there's a part of me that sometimes wonders if all of the pathologies we see, and I'll give it to Javier here, if all of the pathologies we see with AI are in response to a failed social script. Like, so for example, we're afraid of people using AI to cheat on tests and it's destroying education, right? Well, maybe the problem isn't AI, maybe the problem is education as we use it, right? Like, maybe that's the problem. And actually, in a world where people, actually their goal was lifelong learning, then you wouldn't have to worry about this, right? Well, what if people are using it? Mr. Jochen, good to see you. Your talk with Johannes was fantastic on frictionlessness. And actually, we're talking a bit about AI girlfriends and everything else. So what if the reason why people are using, AI to be friends is because they're put into social situations at school that are overwhelming? They can't ever learn how to connect with people, so that's making them go to AI to be their friends. But the only reason they're using it for that is because of the screwed up social environment they find themselves in. What if they're going to AI because we have a society that's not training people in emotional intimacy, right? So, I can keep going. Like, you could argue that hikimoriism in Japan has a lot to do with Japan being obsessed with social status and working long hours, and that makes using technology in a very isolating way more and more likely, right? But what if AI wouldn't be so likely to be used that way if you had a different social order, right? That had different values or different ideas of work. And there's a way in which if AI is going to kind of require radical changes in the social script and social institutions and schooling and work and everything, maybe AI brings around a world where the pathologies that we see people using AI for won't be so present because the institutions of which those pathologies are being used as a certain balm are not there as much anymore, right? That's, of course, a possibility. But of course, then that's going to, but here's the problem. That means you're setting people up to be free, right? People are now free. You don't tell them to do X, Y, and Z. And unfortunately, in very many environments where people are quote unquote free, they're overwhelmed by anxiety, turn to a strong man. So, that you have people actually, they can be overwhelmed by those possibilities, right? Like, I can also imagine the AI friend being used for someone who, say, goes through a trauma or had something really difficult happen to them. Maybe they're a victim of something, and there's no one they can talk to because no one believes them, right? Maybe the AI friend could actually help them talk through and figure out how to work with that trauma, but they would have to use it in a way that would help them then go to people, not to stay away from people, right? Kind of like similarly using the AI to critique your argument versus to self-confirm, right? So those possibilities are also there. That are coming to mind.
Here's the question that I thought was interesting listening to you guys with AI and ideology. Zizek raises a very interesting question between sublime objective ideology and for they know not what they do, is this idea of where is the illusion of ideology on? Is it in knowledge or is it in doing? And I feel like a lot of what the examples were given was actually that I think Zizek is correct to say that the illusion that we have now in ideology is not a question of knowledge, but more a question of doing. it's this idea, it's almost like a cynical ideology, where we know what it is, but we still do it anyways. It's kind of like money, you know. I think if you talk to most people, like, well, you know, money isn't real, right? They'll be like, yeah, of course. But then they go to that pragmatic route, right? Well, like, well, I need it to live. I need it. I need to keep working. I need to. They don't even begin to question that whole symbolic order could be changed, right? So there is a sense in which they don't know, but the way that they don't know is precisely the very context of that symbolic order. It's the very way that symbolic order frames it for them, right? In some sense, the very framing of that symbolic order is exactly the way they think. It's, yeah, we know money isn't real, but we still behave as if it is real, as if it conducts our whole entire social relations. So I think that's probably the most slippery of the type of ideologies that we have today, because I think a lot of kids, I think this is what the intergenerational gap will be in terms of conversations, right? It would be, well, you're an old man and you fall for AI figs, right? It's like, well, yeah, that may be true, but at the same time, you don't understand how the context in which you are framed is also capturing you, right? What my fear would be kids wouldn't be able to discern the framing that they are being constituted by. They'll feel very confident about, oh, I know how to discern information. I know how to discern AI fakes. I know what's real and what's not real. And it's like, yes, you do know, but in some sense you don't know, because you're still doing something that the context has still captured you in. So yeah, I'll leave that there.
No, that's very well put, because like we were talking, so there's a few things where one of the reasons, and I'll throw it to Christian here, one of the reasons why people are so in danger can be where they say, well, I know it's AI. I know it's just AI. I know it's just AI, as if they therefore are fine. They don't have to worry about getting pulled into anything. And actually, they are getting pulled into it. Because, say, for example, as you are talking with ChatGPT and you say, well, I'm not going to fall with ChatGPT. Ah, Michael, good to see you, sir. Because you're like, I know it's AI. You don't realize where the habit of speaking to it and giving it your intimate feelings actually makes you form an attachment to it. And then, boom, it's got you, right? Because you say, well, I know it's just AI. It makes me think of Mr. Jockin's tremendous conversation and Substack as well, where you say, well, I know ChatGPT is just telling me what I want to hear. I know that. As if knowing that means you're safe, right? But then you get in a habit of frictionless interaction that just pulls you along, that the very knowledge that it is artificial intelligence actually makes you not pay attention to how you're being habituated to that frictionlessness, and now you're captured as you think you're not, right? So likewise, as Zizek is pointing out with the fetish, like you say, well, I know money's not real. As if that means you're not structured by it. No. Money, in fact, you're more likely to be structured and habituated by it precisely because you think you know it's a social convention, and you think that is enough not to have it form all your habits or value judgments or all of those different things, right? Now, the discernment that it's a social convention could be the first step toward getting to an awareness of the frame, but it may also not. Right? And what Zizek is pointing to, and I think unfortunately is human nature, is usually we take that step of acknowledging the map is not the territory to make the map indestructible, not to make us realize the girdle point that puts a demand on us, right? So I think that's very, very true. I think, yeah, like we were saying, so for example, the old person can be more aware of getting pulled into something, but the younger could actually be more in jeopardy because they know they're being tricked, but thinking that the knowledge that they are being tricked is an awareness of the framework in which they are being inframed, say by technological essence or a certain assumptions of metaphysics, thinking that that cynicism also applies to the framework, when actually the cynicism can hide the framework that is habituating you. And in that sense, the younger generation could be worse off than the older generation that is more susceptible to getting pulled into a scam, right? Because, the older person, the worst, they get scammed and then they realize they're scammed. That could be the end of it, right? Because now they've learned and they're better off. Whereas the younger person who is forever inframed but not able to tell they are because they think they're above it due to their cynicism may never actually have a moment of having something terrible happen to them as a result of that mistake to wake up out of it, right? So it's possible that the younger is worse off than the older, right? Or they could be better off because they use the knowledge that the map is not the territory, things are not what they seem, to then go to higher thinking of the girdle point. They may use it that way, but also they may not, right? And I think the probability of that also gets tied to if we think a good thing, if we think something good is if it removes friction. If we think it is good because it removes friction, then we're probably like Joachim was talking about, we're probably not going to take it to the realm of the framework. But I think that was very well put. But I'll pause and throw it over to Christian here. Christian, it's good to see you today, sir.
Howdy, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, sir.
I must stop by and express my gratitude for the net. It's great. I hope everyone's gonna have I hope everyone has a good week, and if that includes a wonderful Thanksgiving with loved ones, then even better. I want to say I think the philosophical counseling side of the potential of AI sits a lot better with me than a kind of therapeutic potential, because it's hard for me to imagine, and this just might be a failure of imagination on my part, but it is hard for me to imagine how you allow a kind of therapeutic interaction with AI where you avoid emotional imprinting on the one hand, or yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, and all the complexities that come along with that. And then also it makes me wonder, like, if you then do move, like say you had this really great therapeutic interaction with an AI, but then you go and talk to a real person and it's not as smooth, it's not as frictionless, right? It's more real, it's more gritty, you're right. And I wonder if that will be kind of a difficulty for people to transition to, like if that might, I don't know though. But one thing I do think might be useful is something that's more like a dry kind of diagnostic application of AI. Because I think one of the biggest problems with therapy and mental health treatments or interventions is that actually it just happened again last night. I was talking to someone who I'd met recently, and we were talking about someone else, and they're this local guy who's got a opioid addiction or meth or something. And this guy that I just met goes, yeah, and therapy won't work because, I've tried therapy. That doesn't do anything, right? And I've heard that many, many, many times. And it's because people have an experience that probably isn't helpful, right? But it's very expensive and time consuming, and right, it can be discouraging when it doesn't work. And I think a lot of this is just because people aren't necessarily getting put in touch with the right therapist and right form of therapy to help them, that specific person, deal with their specific issues. So I mean, to me, it's I hold the line that we're in the dark ages of mental health, and it's like you went to a doctor 150 years ago and you got some leeches put on you or something, and like whatever, right? Like you just got some bunk medical treatment, and then you're like, yeah, doctors, they're you can't trust them. They're no good. It's a sham, right? Because you had one village doctor and he happened to like not know how to, or that, you know, they just didn't know how to treat your condition, right? And that's my kind of diagnosis of the mental health ecosystem today, or the therapeutic ecosystem today. So first of all, this means that we need, in my opinion, need to do work on creating a diagnostic that helps people get in touch with the right kind of therapy and right therapist for whatever they're trying to deal with, and for whatever their kind of like personality type is, and etc. Maybe their kind of unique needs and level of readiness for different depths of treatment, etc. But then, if we can develop that diagnostic system, then AI might be able to do a really great and fast job at, you know, just asking questions and analyzing responses to give someone a much better head start on where to start looking for therapeutic intervention. So that's something I think about with AI a lot. But yeah, but where I do think there's a lot more potential for deep engagement is with exactly what you're talking about, which is helping people, you know, discover the girdle points in their own ideologies. Because AI, you know, if all it's doing is reading your response and then, you know, more or less kind of presenting you with new questions to think about, that's, I think, you know, first of all, I think it's kind of easy. It's like there's I think a low bar to train an AI to do that. I don't think you have to worry about emotional imprinting or like projections of consciousness, because it's like it can be a very technical thing, right? It doesn't have to have a personality in order to just ask you questions. And yeah, I see like almost no downside and then plenty of upside, because when people are confronted with questions rather than just propositions, that makes them think, right? Rather than, you know, feel like I mean, if you say something and someone says, but what if this is, or that's actually, that would be a question, but if you just get, you know, a kind of analysis of what you said, here's all the ways that it might be right or wrong. It's like, okay, I mean, yeah, maybe. But if someone says, well, you know, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what about if you thought about it from this perspective, or et cetera, et cetera. And these are like very basic types of inquiries, but this puts someone in the mode of contemplation. And I think there's lots of utility to be discovered in that regard. Also, I just need an AI personal assistant. That's what I really want out of AI personally. And I don't know why it doesn't already exist. I need to be able to like click a button and say, I have a meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please create a reminder for that in an hour, right? And blah, blah, blah. Like just that, just a personal assistant. It's not that hard. Anyway, that I put that higher than AI therapist, right? AI personal assistant. And also I think actually there's like interesting potential there to have like really powerful effects on culture. Because if you have a personal AI assistant who can be kind of like a coach / assistant, who's like, you know, you wake up in the morning And it's, you know, it's just what you'd imagine in a movie or something. Good morning, Christian. Are you ready for your morning jog? You have a 3-day streak. Let's keep it blah, blah, blah. Like that kind of just, you know, like accountability, scheduling, this kind of stuff. If everyone had that in their life, I think it could, even if you're not like, you know, blowing open your reality models or something like that, you're giving yourself a lot more ease, a lot more potential for the little things that make your life a little bit better, right? A little bit healthier, a little bit easier. And I think there could be a strong net effect there where if everyone's just in a slightly better state of mind, slightly better health, slightly more headspace, slightly more free time, slightly less stress, I think that could have real huge network trickle up effects where you know that could be enough to, you know, make you a little less prickly with your kids at the end of a hard day or something, right? That can make you a little more receptive to what that person was trying to tell you at lunch or dinner, or what your wife was trying to tell you, etc. Because your stress level's just like 10% lower. If everyone's stress levels and anxiety levels were like 10% lower, and your health and energy levels were 10% higher, you know, that it doesn't sound like necessarily this big dramatic solution or idea, but I really think that might go further than any other kind of cultural intervention that I can imagine. Because I mean, you might even need that before you're in a better position to do like a contemplative practice or therapy, right? Just a little bit more headspace. You're like, well, what if maybe therapy would be good? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, well, what do you think? AI assisted therapies, blah 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 blah. You know, yeah, that's all I got.
No, I think that's magnificent. That notion of what you're saying on the agent, I definitely can become I can see where AI could be a very big deal because, like, for example, I have to set up so many reminders, like I have to do quarterly taxes, right? Like, and like 1 year they changed the rule from the first 10 days to then the first 3, and I didn't know it. And you know, and you have to keep up with that, and then you're like, I have to renew the car and different things. If I had an AI that I could theoretically ask something like, hey, AI, what is it that I need to do that I'm forgetting I need to do? Oh my gosh. And if it was able to say, well, this time of year you were doing quarterly taxes last year, this time of year you had to do the on the Oldsmobile, the car, it went down that list. Because I can definitely say personally, one of the most stressful dimensions of being an adult is having to remember the things that you don't realize you're forgetting. Like there's that important email that you forgot that you didn't do, right? And you're always like you're having to have a little thing in your mind going, have I done everything? Did I get everything done? Right? Where it's going through your mind, have I done the task? Have I done, I could give you, and if there was something that literally would help with that, that's a massive deal. That's an insane massive deal, right? So I completely agree. The other thing, if I could ask, you know, and you know, I guess the idea of agents that they're making is pointing at this. Like, if I could certainly say, hey, AI, you know, set up a trip to Belmont, and it was literally able to like send you an email. It's got, here are all the best flights. These are the cheapest. This is probably based on your packing habits, this is probably how much luggage you need to get. Here you probably need an Uber, so we'll set up that, and here's 5, right? And it does, like, it gives you boom, 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 the entire itinerary. That's a big deal because that takes a whole lot of time to do. And I know, no, it definitely can. I've definitely used it to figure out the most efficient way, like to get up to DC, red line to silver line. It can certainly help with that. That's where I completely agree that there is some massive use for AI. And also too, if it did things like, you know, oh, this time last year you had your 3-month taxes. I've already kind of set up the document. This is what you spent last year. Does this look right now? and you go click, and you do it. But I think Clayton, you're getting at, and Clayton, wonderful to have you, sir. The issue is you have to trust it. Like you have to know that 99.9% of the time it's right, because like it actually speaks to the work problem. Like if you have a coworker and they do what you need them to do 70% of the time, they're worthless. Because you don't know when the 30% of the time is they get it wrong. And you would then have to go back and check, or that 30% makes you lose a customer. Like you need your coworker to basically never be wrong. That's the only time when you don't feel stress. But of course, there's no such thing as a coworker that's never wrong. But you basically have to have the feeling that you don't have to worry about them. And that, I think what you're pointing out there, Clayton, is that feeling of relationality with the AI becomes a very big deal, right? Because, you know, if I have AI do my taxes and I get audited, I ain't doing AI. But screw you, buddy. You know, that's not going to suffice. So there has to be a level of trust that has to be there. And that's going to be very difficult. But maybe it will be good for the human being to make their self vulnerable in that way, right? Maybe there's a kind of courage that comes from that vulnerability, right? Is that good versus maybe that will be good, but using AI to self-confirm will be bad, right? Well, that's the issue. You can see all these different situations having different possibilities. I'll throw it, Michael. I love what you were saying also, Clayton, about the dark age of mental health. That's grand. Like we're just like discovering, and that makes sense because following Philip Reed, mental health for Freud and all these cats is the first world problem, right? Like that's a problem that happens when you get more comfort, when you get more technological innovation, because you're no longer, like your mental life becomes more of a problem because you're not spending all your days getting clean water, right? And also social givens dissolve, modernity sets in, and life becomes more existential. So it makes sense that we really are, in a way, the dark ages of mental health. We're just starting to even know what the word mental means, right? So I really appreciate that framing. I think also too, you're right. It should not be underestimated. If you were to just reduce the average person's stress by 10%, what that would do, because you could argue that, looking at Dietrich McCloskey, the Great Enrichment, once you saved people's time because of technological innovation, if you just save them 30 minutes a day, well, that can start leading to an industrial revolution and remake the entire world, right? Small changes can actually be paradigmatic shifts. So I completely agree with that possibility that you're pointing at. I think also, well, I've also been thinking a lot about that topic of the philosopher, therapist, what exactly they do. We spoke last night with Seth and Aspasia, Seth and Aspasia, and I spoke with Aspasia, and we were talking about that. But I'll pause before going into that and throw it over to Michael and then Clayton here. Michael, thank you for being here this evening.
Great as always to be here, and happy Thanksgiving week to everybody. I hope wherever you are, with whomever you are celebrating, however you are celebrating, it's a grand time. I wanted to respond to the AI personal assistant thing, and then also as an aspiring mental health professional, respond to the dark age of mental health. Firstly on the AI thing, just kind of a preamble, a personal anecdote. So yesterday I went to go see the new Wicked movie with a couple friends. And it was fantastic. But we scan our tickets and they're like auditorium 8, and we walk in, and we were there like right when the showtime that I had booked was, and on the theater website when I was booking the tickets, it was like like the movies usually start like 25 to 30 minutes after showtime. And so we walk in, and it's like in the middle of a scene from the movie, and we're all kind of just like, wait, what? Like the movie shouldn't have started, and it seems like it's pretty far along in the movie, and I'm just kind of confused because I'm like all the tickets online had like already been booked, like most of them, and like all these seats are open, and I'm like, what's going on? And so then one of my friends like asks me to like hand her the email like confirmation, And like just before I handed it to her, I realized that I had booked it for the wrong day. I'd booked it for the previous day. And I handed it to her. She was like, Michael, today is the 24th, not the 23rd. And we had been like texting back and forth, like for this day. And I was like about to, pick the tickets. And then for whatever reason, I like exited out of the window. And when I came back, I think it like refreshed it for like the next day or something. And I'm like, if there was like an AI that could be like, according to your text communications, like this doesn't like this is the day that you want or whatever. And then so then I had to like go back to the guy who scanned us in, and I was like, I don't want to like pay for tickets again, obviously. So I like very awkwardly was like, because there was a showing like 15 minutes later, and I was like, hey, could you tell me like where the auditorium for the next Wicked movie is? And he took like 10 minutes because he has this like paper sheet, and it's like this like convoluted matrix of like all of the movies in the day and which auditoriums there, and it's just like this whole long thing. And now just in light of what we're talking about, I'm like, tech could have just, streamlined all of that. It was also my clerical error, but yeah, there's, Daniel, like what you said, like helping you remember the things that you don't even know that you're forgetting is so true. There's things all the time that, I think it's usually things that I kind of put off that are important, but they're like a week out, and I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna go day by day. I'm gonna go day by day, and then you never make that to-do list. You never like it, you just rely on your memory recall. And I think it's like it's a problem of the things that you don't even know that, like the things that you don't know that you don't know, but it's also the things that you don't really care about knowing. It's just like the things that have to be done, but we remember things. Yeah. We remember things more easily if we care about them, right? You're never gonna forget your kid's birthday, like no matter how hard you try. You may forget the bank teller's birthday that they told you 6 months ago. And so memory seems to be correlated with care. And it's as much as, like work efficiency bros on YouTube, will like coach you on how to make to-do lists and how to like streamline efficiency and, like, how to like, yeah, how to like get everything on your to-do list done and whatever. It's like, we can't hold all of the priorities of, if your parents, childcare and now you have to like not just be aware of your own schedule, like you have to be aware of the schedule of your spouse, your kids, all of that. And it's I mean, I think like systems and structures can definitely help, but I think that's where AI can be a huge lift, is like being kind of a brain trust and offloading the things that are just not really high on the priority list, which frees us up to focus on the things that really matter and that we really care about. So yeah, I'm curious what people's thoughts are on that. As it pertains to the dark age of mental health care, I think I definitely agree. I think, people like Greg Henriquez have been talking about that with like the replication crisis in psychology, how there's this interesting trend that's developed as more and more therapeutic modalities have, been around now for 50 plus years, right? Even a lot of the kind of contemporaries of Freud and kind of the people who just came after him, like a lot of those modalities are now evidence-based, and basically what study after study has shown is there's really not one modality that is more efficacious than another. And that wasn't always the case. In Freud's time and like before Freud, it was really psychoanalysis was like, the gold standard in psychodynamics. And now there's just a proliferation of all sorts of modalities. And I think that can be beautiful because it's expanding the toolkit, so to speak, of a therapist that can tailor care to like a wide range of people. And I think the approach that, kind of moves away from the overemphasis on diagnosis and pathology to a much more humanistic orientation, and kind of like a depth psychology orientation towards like even clinical disorders, I think is like a really important step forward in the field. But I hear story after story of people, especially in like insurance sponsored mental health care that you would find at your medical health facility. It's still in that model. It's still in that kind of like, I'm reading questions from a checklist, and it feels very one size fits all. And it's much more about symptom reduction, symptom amelioration than really a cultivation of a relationship. And that's what I suspect, like that's the kind of common thread that I hear from people is like, I don't really feel connected to my therapist. Maybe they're kind of like a blank canvas type that like allows you to just vent. And I was telling someone recently, like there's kind of a bell curve with that. If you have that type of therapist, like for the first few sessions, especially if you have like a lot of suppressed emotions, pent up emotions, unfelt emotions, unprocessed thinking, that can be very helpful. It's like I now finally have a space to be able to do what I can't normally do. But there's kind of a limit. There's like a finite limit to that kind of exhaust, like volcanic eruption, like style, right? Where you start being like, well, where do I go from here? And if you don't have a therapist that's like continuing to probe you deeper and continuing to be like a mirror to hold up to you, to like cultivate discernment, I think like if there isn't like a philosophical component to the therapeutic relationship, and philosophy and psychology, especially like the professional practice of therapy, don't often meet and don't often engage with each other. And I think that's like a real problem. And I'm sure there's like so many more facets to touch on with why, we're in this dark age of mental health care and like how to get out of it. But that seems to be part of it for me. There's even something called philosophical counseling, which I think is like a really interesting model. I can't remember who really was kind of at the start of that, but he's been interviewed by John Vervaeke. He wrote this book called Plato Not Prozac. That's a really fun read. But yeah, it's definitely something I think about and meditate on a lot, is like, how do we get out of this? How do I do my part to not contribute to that dark age, and hopefully kind of be a part of a movement towards something more embodied and holistic and generative for people. And it's an exciting, I think, in the wake of that challenge, it's an exciting opportunity to really birth something new. So yeah, I'll pass it back.
No, magnificent. I'll throw it to Clayton here. No, what you're saying first, I'll just say with the agent stuff. Yeah, exactly right. Like, there are deadlines and you need to sign up by this date so the kid can do X, Y, and Z. And then there's also a jersey, deadline, and there are all these different things. And you forgot that there's also a jersey deadline. If you don't have that, you're not allowed to play. But that's not at the same time, and it's different, and you didn't realize it was different, blah, blah, blah. If there was an agent that would be like, hey, you signed up for this thing, but you didn't do the jersey thing, that doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't you also do the jersey thing? Oh my gosh, you're right. I didn't realize they were separate. Like, that would be a big deal. Also, there's something about that reminds you of it's a humbling thing. So that may help keep AI go towards psychosis, right? Because AI kind of confirms you and makes you feel how smart you are, whereas this agent role has a certain sort of potential humbling to it that may help it not go in the self-confirming direction, right? And also too, I definitely think, actually many people's lives are dramatically impacted because they didn't do something they didn't know they needed to do, or they missed a payment and now they have 30% on a credit card or something like that. Like, or they didn't plan their spending properly, so they don't have enough at the end of the month to pay all their bills or whatever. Like, there's likely many people who would, potentially have better life courses if they had a quote unquote secretary or something like that, right? Or even if someone made you go, hey, it looks like you have a traditional Roth IRA, but looking at your spending and your yearly income, you may want to actually consider a 401k that has more contributions, or maybe a Roth IRA. Well, I didn't even know there was a difference between the traditional IRA and a Roth IRA. Yes, actually, blah, 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 blah. Or looking at what you're invested in, you probably want to move from a money mutual fund over into buying the SPY because you would get dividends of X, Y, Z. Like, all of these things you didn't even know you didn't know. That actually, when you're 60 years old, you look back and says, wow, I missed out on 100K that I really would need for retirement because I didn't do that thing I didn't know that I needed to do, right? I can absolutely see AI being very beneficial for that, right? And likewise, I can see people using, and I've already seen stories of this, people using AI to get legal help that they couldn't afford that makes a massive impact on their life, right? Because they get this legal help or with insurance or blah, blah, blah. So I completely agree with what you're saying. I think also, yes, Enriquez with the theory, absolutely. Philosophical counseling, I know Lindbergh at the store also will talk about that. There is absolutely a question of what exactly, well, I was just also going to say, I think insurance goes for quantification, and it is easier to quantify if a symptom has gone away. And also, if the symptom goes away and I don't treat the root problem, you might continue to get services, and that might be good for the businesses or different like that, right? For the healthcare, but then you have the war between the doctors and the insurers, right? But quantification, certainly, like the list structure, it's quantifiable, and that makes people feel like, oh man, we're making real progress. But one of the funny problems is, I would argue, you can't actually heal mental health problems via quantifiable means. There has to be a qualitative change, right? So the feeling of quantitative progress is a certain illusion to actually going toward transformation. But then if you metaphysically believe only the quantifiable is real, well, now you're enclosed. You're trapped, right? Because you believe the only real stuff can be quantified, and therefore the only real progress to good mental health is quantifiable, when actually it's the exact opposite. If it's quantifiable, all it can do is treat the symptoms. Well, because of your understanding of the situation, you're enclosed. And philosophy is so much in the business of avoiding enclosures that you don't even know you're falling into, right? So I appreciate that. And there's more to be said on the therapy philosophy relation, because I think about that a lot, but I will pause and I will throw it to Clayton. Clayton, thank you for being here this evening, sir. I hope you're doing well, and it is a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, I feel privileged to be able to join. I'm at work today, so I had to run outside, and hopefully you can see my church background.
There's it's beautiful.
A church nearby.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so speaking of counseling, I'm also a counselor in training. So yay, I'm excited to hear that Michael is one too. And that's why I want to connect with you a bit. There's a bit to unpack there, but that we'll save that for later. Coming back to the AI and sort of how it can actually be more helpful with all, like with the perennial problems. I'd say, in my opinion, the challenge I'm observing so far is it's an embodiment problem. Like, these AI tools have been trying to solve these problems, and they've made like really good progress over the years. However, the problem was the packaging, because you have Apple telling you to talk to your phone, you have Google telling you to talk to your phone, and that your phone is going to have this capability and it's going to do all these things for you. And, to a non-technical person or a non-computerized person, they're going like, what do you mean talk to my phone? Even I work in technology and I find it strange talking to my phone. I don't talk to my phone. But it is a very strange way. And I think this whole mode of being able to chat to the technology brought us a bit closer, but not close enough. And so while we can still chat with the technology, we still don't feel that we can, have that personal relationship with it, because we can't yet attribute personhood to these systems. In fact, even within the technology space, you find, like there's a very small percentage of people working with these tools in this way, because it requires a certain way of thinking about it. Like I have a colleague who I ask, so don't you use this AI tool because it's going to be able to collect all this huge amount of documentation and find out the tiny detail you're looking for and articulate it in a way that you would agree with. And if you keep doing that, it's going to even learn how you speak, and it will be able to give you a very good first draft that you can now finally edit. But all of this is too much, because it's like, wait, what? So I have to trust it, and I have to give my documentation, I have to say a bit about myself to it. And who is at the back there? Who's going to abuse this information? Who's going to abuse this relationship? There's all these human worries that come into play. And so we're sort of like, reminds me of the Garden of Eden moment, right? It's like, do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's like, but why? Right? It's like, well, you're not going to have the capacity to, deal with it in the right way. But that would not make sense to someone who doesn't even know that they should not eat of that tree, right? So it's just, let's give you the caution and hope it works. Because if it doesn't work, you're screwed. But we think you're going to be screwed anyway. So, yeah. And I guess, like, if you're God in that situation, that's the best you can do. And we're finding that same problem now with the tech, because it's really hard to articulate all the potential forms a person can be to another person. It's like the person only recognizes their form as the only version. And you hear this from Michael Levin and all the others saying that, there's many other forms and you need to be mindful of them. But this is all cutting edge stuff. This is all very strange ways of perceiving. So to kind of like to sum it up, what I'm trying to say is that it's a big embodiment problem, and it won't be solved for a long while. It's kind of like we're at a moment where we have to change and sort of technologize ourselves. And you're probably starting to see that with the, Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas. They're a bit much more technologized. They trust the technology more. We look at them and we think they're weird. It's like, oh, you're trusting the iPad over what me, your parent, has told you? And say, yeah, I mean, it's right here. I can see it. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you understood how it works at the back, if you would really trust it. And maybe it's like they're leaning on their naivety, which is giving them the, what is it, Dunning-Kruger effect. It's like that confidence to kind of like go full blast at it. But yeah, it's a big problem. It's a big problem, and it's definitely not gonna help with the mental health crises to come. So I'll stop there and pass it back. Thank you.
No, thank you, Clayton, and that's fantastic with the counseling. So congratulations to you, sir, and that's wonderful to hear. And no, I appreciate what you're saying on the embodiment. If anyone has final things to say this evening, and again, thank you for coming at this Thanksgiving time, is greatly appreciated. It's very interesting because I completely agree. Luke was saying when he was here, Luke, on this idea, because he works in the field, on this idea that there's this need for the processes of AI to be transparent. We have to see, where it is sourcing from, because otherwise there's always the sourcing problem, right? And the question becomes then, can human beings, so if they see the source to go, oh, I can trust this or not trust it, do they have the ability, though, to discern what the source is telling them, right? So there's also kind of a meta problem. Are human beings going to need AI to tell them, even if they could see the source of AI, if that AI is trustable, right? And that's kind of the meta evaluation problem that you always have, right? Well, funny enough, what it would mean is that AI, in order to be trusted, would actually still require, in my opinion, an education outside the AI, say in communities like this, where you train your discernment and your judgment to be able to actually identify a good source or good material, or if that answer it's giving you about Hegel or that understanding is good. So there's still a kind of need for human judgment that has to be at play in order to actually have a sense of what the AI is giving you is useful or not, right? And then, of course, with the embodiment, I guess that makes me think of the Vervaeke. I think you're exactly right that this is a problem that's far into the future. Perhaps the temptation, though, of some AI corporations then is say, well, instead of dealing with the embodiment problem, what if we just make humans disembodied? Or, identifying with the AI, right? What if we just bring, let's just get rid of the body, right? Then we overcome the embodiment problem. And I'm afraid that might be what some are doing. They're like, okay, well, what if we just make there no practical difference between human beings and AI because they treat themselves as a head on a stick, right? Or they lose the ability to socialize, or they become emotionally ignorant, ergo the spread of global hikikomoriism, right? Because if we just make everyone like those people in Japan who never leave their apartment, then although they're still embodied, they're not that different anymore from the AI that is not embodied. And so they can't tell the difference anymore. And then you solve the embodiment problem by lowering the bar dramatically. That would not be the right way to do it. But unfortunately, there may be temptations to go that way. But that's actually where, for me, philosophical judgment is important, because actually, can you tell the difference between keeping the bar ahead and moving toward it and lowering the bar? Because from this point, if the bar is coming towards you, it looks like you're approaching it, right? Like from a relativity perspective, it looks like you're approaching it, but actually you're just lowering it versus you going toward it. That is actually something for me that discernment, judgment, and philosophy is actually strongly in the business of. Being able to tell the difference between lowering the bar and going toward and keeping the bar raised and heading toward it, right? And being able to discern those differences. But then, of course, we as human beings may not want to know those differences because it's easier to lower the bar. And if we are ignorant, it's like, well, I thought we were approaching the bar, not lowering yet, and we can plausibly deny that we didn't know that difference. there may be something in us that wants to maintain that plausible deniability, right? Because then we're innocent, but then of course that becomes very problematic. Some other thoughts that I have before closing here, if unless anyone has any final thoughts, I am also thinking more and more about that question, therapy, counseling, philosophy, and things like that, and like what exactly do we need for better mental health or different things? And something I've been thinking more and more about, and it is like, why is it in philosophy, for example, and I think and Aspasia was saying this about counseling, why is it that you never tell people what to do? Like the philosopher doesn't really give you the answer, right? So in one sense, you're like, this is a waste of time. Like, why? They never say what I'm supposed to do. Like Aspasia was saying, so you'll have someone come in your office and say, should I leave my girlfriend or not? And you're like, I don't know. I don't know if you should leave your girlfriend or not, right? So it's like, well, why am I getting counseling, right? Why am I even here, right? Well, I'm of the opinion that what the philosopher, and I'll just say philosopher, but I actually think it applies to a good counselor and a good therapist as well. I think the philosopher is trying to get you into the place you need to be able to answer that question for yourself. That's what they're trying to do, right? And one of the reasons why I think you need both therapy and philosophy is because it requires both rationality, emotions in the body. You need to get all of you there, right? Not just your mind, not just your heart, but you need the heart there and the mind. So you need philosophy to get the mind there. Then you need the heart there, and you need embodiment practices to get there as well, right? So this is why I think therapy without philosophy is in trouble, and therapy without philosophy and embodiment is in trouble. So you need, I'll just say embodiment, if you grant me these categories. I'll just say mind, heart, embodiment, mind, heart, body, okay? All three of those have to get into this condition, okay? I would like to argue that the condition you have to be in is, well, the girdle point, where the map is not the territory, where you get out, where you're brought to the place where you realize that my ideas may not correspond with reality, right? Which is traumatizing and very, very difficult. For you to actually get to the place where, yes, you have a narrative of what happened, but what if your narrative is wrong? Well, that can destroy the ego and overwhelm people, but actually it is only in the girdle point, which is where the map is not the territory, that you're actually in the condition by which you can even make the decision if you should leave your girlfriend or not. So the philosopher, it seems like they're not doing anything, but actually what they're doing is leading you to the girdle point, which the argument is that it is only in the girdle point that you can make good decisions. Like if you're not in the girdle point, you actually can't make good decisions, right? But how do you get to the girdle point? Sometimes it takes deconstruction. Sometimes it takes apologetics, because the girdle point can only be found if you complete your map. I have to complete your map to find the girdle point. So that's where you need the philosophical argument to have good reason to say believe in Christianity, for example, right? Like if you don't have enough of apologetic understanding of Christianity, then you can't meaningfully find the places where there's an apophatic opening, right? Or capitalism or communism or whatever map it is, right? So philosophers can help you complete your map, but they're helping you complete your map not so that you have a map that you can use to guide your entire life. But no, we need to complete your map to find the girdle point, actually. Likewise, the therapist is like, we need to understand your history to find the girdle point, not to prove that you're right, not to remove friction, but to find the girdle point, right? We need to do embodiment practices to find the girdle point. And this is what's interesting for me, and I'll pause and throw it to Michael here. There is basically a suggestion that you ought, like ethically, you ought to bring people to the girdle point, which would follow if it is only in the girdle point that you can actually make good decisions. Like if you literally can't make good decisions except in the girdle point, then there's a kind of ethic to bring people to the girdle point, right? Because otherwise you're setting up people to make bad decisions. And I think basically, honestly, when it comes to relational dynamics or most serious adult problems, and I would argue most mental health problems, they are problems of girdle points. They're not problems of maps. They're problems of the other, the one who doesn't fit into your consistency easily, the one you don't understand, which of course can be yourself too if you don't, you've othered yourself because of various reasons, right? So the girdle point is the place where you're in the acknowledgement of the other, but you don't have your map to reduce them to fully understand them. That is emotionally overwhelming. That can destroy your nervous system. That is mentally very difficult. So the therapist has to bring you there slowly, compassionately, and wisely, just like Socrates does in philosophy, just like someone does in embodiment practices, right? So that to me is how I've been thinking a lot. I'll pause here. Like that's why the philosopher and the therapist, even though they don't tell you what to do, is nevertheless helping you discern what to do, because they are helping you arrive in the girdle point. And once you get there, the therapist says, now you can answer that question. Now go take a walk. Now go take some time, and you'll be able to think. Like now you'll be able to arrive at the correct decision. And basically, one of the reasons why I think there are many modalities is there are many ways to arrive at the girdle point in therapy. There are many hey man, you can arrive at the girdle point in any map. There's many philosophies and religions that will get you to the girdle point, right? There's no one way in the sense of we're talking the girdle point. So yeah, there's lots of modalities by which to do them, because all possible maps have to entail the point that acknowledges they're not the territory, right? And actually, and getting people to the girdle point will vary in its effectiveness relative to the individual you're dealing with. Therefore, you need different modalities by which to do it. And the skillfulness, which is something Christian has emphasized that I agree with, is the skillfulness to recognize the proper modality becomes extremely important. So yeah, so for me, I've been thinking about that a lot, on how why is that the philosopher never gives you the answer. They're in the business of realizing the condition in which you can best arrive at the answer. And I can easily imagine AI being used to help with the girdle point. I can easily imagine it being used to bring people to the girdle point, if only you resist the temptation to use it for self-confirmation. And the temptation for self-confirmation to show you that your map is indestructible will be really, really tempting. But if you can resist that and use it instead to bring you to the girdle point so that you make a decision versus ChatGPT make the decision for you, then it could be very, very useful. But it will require resisting that temptation to use it for self-confirmation, in the same way that and I think honestly, true learning requires you resisting the temptation of using your worldview, religion, or ideas to avoid the other. Like if you use your perfect map of Christianity to avoid the other, that's not education. You have to use your map as the view from somewhere that is necessary by which to encounter the other person. And I think basically an effective philosophy, therapy, counseling, etc., so forth, is operating within that sort of schema. But I will pause and I will throw it to Michael here, and then if anyone has anything else. Michael, please.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. As an aside, I counted the number of squares in the framed photo behind you, and I got 12. I don't know if that's right. That's how distractible my brain is. But yeah, what you were saying about could be, could not be. I'm like, if there's like a disciple symbolism in there, that's freaking awesome. But yeah, I mean, what you were saying around the not giving you the answer, that's one of the things that struck me at some point about my relationship with my therapist is he's never given me anything prescriptive. Like and that was my projection of, like that's kind of how I evaluated good therapy and bad therapy in my mind before I actually experienced it. And sometimes I go back and forth and I'm like, could I have been saved from some poor decisions that I've made if because we kind of have this relationship where, in many ways I'm like a younger version of him and just kind of childhood history and career path and just like sensibilities and stuff. And so I'm sure there have been things that I have done or said where, he could kind of see where the next like, pictures or scenes in the movie were going to be. And I'm sure he maybe at some point or another has like wanted to stop me from doing or saying or thinking certain things. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think what is gained there, and we in the net talk about, and like John Vervaeke will talk a lot about like broad, like practices that broadly transfer out into your world, into your life, things that bear fruit outside of the like the specific container in which they're in. And I think if you allow someone to embody what the process and the pathway to discernment is through, you know, somatic work, connecting with emotions, like allowing them, my therapist talks about like every emotion has has like a beginning, middle, and end, like allowing for the full experience of the emotion, but then crucially, like on the other end, once the dust settles, like seeing the limitations of that emotion, seeing how there's certain maps that we all have and certain paradigms that we live in and the limitations of those. And like, is this actually my map, my paradigm, or was this like superimposed on me? And kind of feeling the agency to like kind of play around within your map and also like play in constructing new ones. I think is like a really important and valuable skill to cultivate, and a therapist, a good one, can really help you do that. But ideally, you know, I've heard people say like a good therapist should want to work themselves out of a job. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, if you see your therapist for decades that like they're doing something wrong or like you're doing something wrong. But like the kind of, I think the kind of like wisdom within that is that they should kind of like, therapy should be like the practice for like the game of life. And like it's really about like cultivating experiential learning. And I think like the ability to I mentioned a couple nets ago, I think the like quote by Frankel that says cognition is the space between reaction and response, and like the ability to create that space in moments where your reactions are like really triggered. And you know, I think like in kind of a procedural way, like seems like the first step of therapy is to really notice what those are. Note, like, just kind of have those come online. Like, what are the things that really trigger me? What are the things that really like set off my fight, flight, freeze, fawn response? And then from there, like, what is afforded to me if I can create some distance and create some space from that. Because I think I don't understand like that much about the girdle point, but what it seems like I'm getting from it is it's this point where you kind of realize the like contradictory nature of your own map. Like you kind of realize, you kind of stare your hypocrisy in your face. And then holding that tension and not running away from it or doing all the things that we like do in the face of that. Then what's revealed on the other side of that is a new set of choices, than just kind of how we would normally respond or operate. And yeah, that's really helpful to think about. I think another thing, and I'll pass it back because I know you want to wrap up, but something that I've just been encountering recently is how I made a certain decision that kind of caused a ripple of decisions a few months ago, and it was based on a certain priority that I had for independence and newness and novelty, you know, moving out of my parents' house. And now I'm realizing I've taken now 2 jobs in a row that have been far less than stellar. And I kind of feel this like egg on my face thing. And I'm actually contemplating moving back home for a number of reasons. And I'm realizing that like not just, am I wanting to do that because like these jobs are not a great fit, but because my priorities have changed. Like I now care less about proving to myself that I can live on my own. And like, you know, doing the independent 20s thing of going out in the world. And I'm like, I have all this community here where I live. And like, I have that foundation. And instead of like kind of trying to create community from scratch, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. And I'm like willing to like sit with those like feelings of FOMO of like, oh, look at all my friends like traveling around the world, like living by themselves, and here I am living back with family. That's no longer like something that I shame about myself. And again, I don't think I could have got there unless I did the like opposite thing and realized how challenging that was, and just kind of what I feel like the universe is like communicating to me. And so I think that that's something that like therapists and philosophers like can enable people to do. I think they can enable them both to trust and respond to their like intuitive callings, but then also be able to recognize when it's time to shift. When it's like, because so many people like destroy themselves because they believe that they have to live a certain way. Even if it's like, oh, like this is like my own call, you know, it's not like someone else is telling me what to do, but it's like, oh, I felt called to, you know, be this type of person or to be a parent. And I realized, oh no, I can't be a parent. I can't get pregnant or whatever it is. And like people like are crushed by that. And I think a therapist and a philosopher can like really help someone in that. I don't know if that's a girdle point or what that place is, but construct anew a life. But yeah, I'll pass it back.
No, that was magnificent, and thank you all for being here on this evening. Few things. Yeah, that's a girdle point, because your map isn't what your life is. What you thought your life was going to be is not, right? So the map is not the territory. It breaks down. Also, another way to think of the girdle point is at that point where you realize that you can be wrong, and if you're wrong, you'll experience yourself as right. Because if you're wrong, if you know that you're wrong, then you're right about that. Like the real revelation of the human experience, where you really go, oh crap, is when being wrong feels like being right. Once you realize that being wrong feels like being right, then oh my gosh, the map isn't the territory, and I can't know when it's not. Oh my gosh, what in the world, right? But that actually right there is the place, and dwelling in that actually then affords you better decision making. Because that is itself the girdle point, actually, to make the meta move. So, but that is where you make better decisions, right? Because then you're actually willing to think possibilities that before you were cut off from, right? Like you say, no, I got to go out and be my own person, independent, and so on and so forth. Well, the map isn't the territory. So that doesn't necessarily follow. And yet you may have needed to do that precisely to realize that the map was not the territory, because there's a difference between, say, staying at home and returning home. And like Hegel and Hume and Eliot and other people always emphasize the kind of return. You know, there's a few things also I'll just note quickly is that, yeah, I mean, look, we have this kind of idea of the nuclear family. We threw away the traditional family, the self-made person, et cetera, so forth. All of these have contributed to various pathologies in the society that are very problematic, right? Certainly, we live on the farm that I grew up on, right? That's a very powerful foundation, and really, it's just very funny because, you know, when we moved back in like 2014, everyone was like, oh my gosh, you've wasted your potential. There was so much, you know, you'll never, and I was just unloading trucks forever. And it's just very interesting because now there's all this idea of people going, you know, wanting to do that kind of thing, or there being more openness to that kind of thing. And it's just very interesting how those things work. But also too, like on that idea of needing to have the idea of being independent, of never being of that kind of idea that actually is kind of necessary for the return. And in Hegel, the return is always an RE and the return is never a repetition. The return always entails a transformation because you're different coming back than you are to stay. I think it also points to the problem that you were getting at, or this kind of interesting question where you go, well, what if my therapist actually would have been more prescriptive? Maybe I would have avoided some mistakes, right? A way I think about it is that a philosopher, or I'll just, a therapist, yeah, they could be more prescriptive and you would avoid X, but they can never keep you from avoiding some X. Because if you don't make those mistakes, there are just other mistakes you're going to make. And actually, there can be a kind of grace in letting you go on and make this mistake that is most imminent. Because the sooner you make it, the sooner you learn from it, and the sooner you change, right? So one of the things that also can occur is the reason why there's a wisdom in basically never being prescriptive, unless we're dealing with like fixing a water pipe or fixing a tractor, because those are tangible realities. But if we're talking with human decision making, one of the reasons why it seems best to basically never be prescriptive is because the human requires mistake. Like they require error. Like you can't actually develop without mistake. Like there's no such thing as the perfect journey without mistake. Perfection requires mistake. Perfection requires Jesus crucified. Perfection requires blood. It requires, wound, right? So there's a way in which there's a weird way in which the therapist or the philosopher not being prescriptive has a certain cruelty to it, right? There can be almost kind of a cruelty to it. But if you understand that actually mistake is necessary, it's kind of I don't want to say a necessary cruelty, but it is the way of things that require one to go through the shortcomings of their own decision making to actually change them as a subject to be better decision makers. And it's actually kind of loving to have the person do that sooner than later, because the sooner you do it, the more you can start making the right foundation and go from there, right? So so there's no way, I don't believe that there's any way for the human to avoid mistake in general. You can avoid a mistake, but not mistake in general. And actually the person that keeps you from ever making mistake is making you fragile. Now, I do think a good philosopher and therapist won't allow you to make a devastating mistake. They will step in if it's going to destroy your life. They will become prescriptive if the decision you're going to make is literally, objectively, no doubt whatsoever, going to bankrupt you or something like that, right? Or it's like, no, this is going to be something you can't undo. But usually, here's the thing, when you get into the kind of these key developmental moments, they very rarely tend to be, well, they almost by definition are not decisions like that, right? They're more ambiguous. There are more things you need to see for yourself. There's more things that you need to kind of try or go through, right? In those situations, they're not prescriptive, right? Like, because you actually, what they need to do is to actually help you through that season, or to create a kind of memory that as you're going through that mistake, you remember something that was told to you that you can then harness as the thing unfolds, that you can then turn it in the right direction. So there are plant things in your memory bank. There are plant things for where you can better understand and handle the error, but they won't necessarily be in the business of prescribing to you what to do so that you avoid it, because you actually need to go through it. And then because once you do that, you become willing to do things that you otherwise may never be willing to. Say, go back to your parents, or go back to home and have that firm foundation, or to actually change your priorities, right? Like, if you never change your priorities, and actually that transformation in your priorities is necessary for your blossoming as a subject, then avoiding that error would be a curse, right? It would be a bad thing. And actually, in my opinion, good therapists and good philosophers actually have a sense of what errors the person can make that has a high probability of actually helping them blossom, right? They have a sense of what those are. And thus the quote unquote cruelty has some good to it. It's actually kind of good in that sense, right? Like, so I think that is part of it in the foundation. I also very much like what you were saying with Franco, and I've always liked that quote, where cognition has the space between, reaction and response. There is no doubt whatsoever the girdle point has a certain suspension to it. It has a certain holding of between reaction and response. Because when you're in the girdle point, the reaction is anxiety. And the natural response would be to run, to go back to the indestructible map, to go back to what you understand, to go back to consistency. Cognition would help you not make that mistake and keep you in it. And I think basically philosophers, therapists, and counselors are, in that sense, equipping you with the cognition to dwell in the girdle point versus flee it, to help you find the girdle point, to bring you to the girdle point, because in so doing, they bring you to the place from which the decision you need to make can be made and ought to be made. Because anywhere else, from any other position that you make the decision, it will not be where you ought to make it. You need to do it in that girdle point because that will demand so much of you, but in a good way. But Michael, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly, I was thinking about just this kind of like move in my life, away and then back, and how every time I've moved back home, it's been because I've lost a job or, left a job, whatever. And there's kind of always been like a tinge of like defeat. Like it's kind of like, it's like home base that the wounded soldier goes to get, patched back up so they can go out again. And this time it feels different. Like it feels like, at least for right now, it's actually what I'm moving towards instead of just, kind of like a fail safe or something. And I was thinking about the sensation of like going out and doing a workout and coming back, and the like level of the experience of rest that you have when you come back. And it's very different than like the rest you have, when you wake up late on a Saturday morning and you're making pancakes and you're like just kind of like, watching a movie or something. It's like a rest that you can only really experience after having gone out and done something challenging. And I was just thinking about that with this like state that I'm in, where I'm now realizing, what I want is coming back. It's like I couldn't get that if I just stayed home. I actually had to go out and learn the things that I learned and kind of get knocked down to realize what I actually already had that is like really hard to replicate. And I think that's, where an overprotective parent might not want you to leave. The therapist is actually like, no, do that, try and slay that dragon. And even if you don't succeed, the insights and the lessons that you gain will be so much more valuable than, if you hadn't. Because it's like you're constantly, it's like the Michelangelo thing with like carving the marble and getting to David. It's like you're kind of constantly like refining like who you are, and you're like refining your perception every time you take on a new venture, or you move to a new place, you start a new relationship. And so I think that there's like something to be said about that experience of like that restfulness, that calm that can't really be cultivated just sitting on a meditation cushion in your room. It's like you have to go out and, I don't know, you like stumble and then try and walk again.
Completely agree. Very well very well put. And what you were saying also about like the helicopter parent not letting them go out, or et cetera, so forth. There's something where, for me, like a quote unquote good parent lets their kid go into the deep end, knowing that they're not that great at swimming, but keeping them in the corner of their eye making the kid feel like they're not being watched, but actually the parent is, but not letting the kid know that they're being watched as they go into the deep end. And as they begin to sink, the parent, runs in and gets them, right? So you let them experience that feeling of drowning, maybe that feeling of, oh my gosh, I can't swim, but the parent then got them. And then the parent, when you pull them out, the parent says, try it again. As opposed to saying, see, I told you couldn't swim. You say, no, try it again. You're almost there. So, but that sort of movement, right? I think that's also what a good philosopher and a good therapist and a good counselor are doing, right? That kind of watchful eye. And maybe the parent lets them get not in the deep end, because that would be too much, but the not shallow in the middle of the pool, right? You judge that based on the particular person that you're dealing with, right? And you make those decisions. I think that speaks to a lot. The final thing I'll say is on this notion of rest, I very much appreciate. I would also say that there is a certain rest that is possible only from dwelling in the girdle point, only in doing the workout of staying in this place of the map is not the territory, because you encounter otherness. You seriously encounter otherness versus try to push out otherness. A rest is possible there that I would argue is the rest necessary for basically creativity, for experiencing beauty. Like you can only create from rest. And Pastor Andrew Lennon was saying that, and it's very true. Creativity and rest go together. Piper leisure. There's this history of leisure. I would argue that leisure, rest, that affords creativity and friendship and all of these things is only possible from the workout of the girdle point. That's the only place to get it. And also the only true rest is the rest that follows from the workout of the girdle point. Because otherwise you're fragile. You only have rest if you maintain your map, right? Like, yeah, that's right. Niebuhr Hauser is very good on leisure. So like if you don't get the rest of the girdle point, you're going to get rest from avoiding the girdle point, from avoiding anxiety. And of course, that's a false rest. That's actually avoidance. It's a simulacra of rest. The absence of anxiety is not the same as rest, right? So it's very important to develop rest. And then I think the fullness of man, the fullness of woman, the fullness of the human being is in Sabbath, right? It is in Eden. It is in rest. It is in leisure, right? And Sabbath in the Bible is not a word that means taking a nap. When God rests on the seventh day, that does not mean God took a nap. It means he resided over creation. It's a word that means something more like reign. You reign over. You don't need to work on the Sabbath because God reigns. He's in control. He don't need you to do everything, right? So there's this idea that Sabbath rest has a certain sort of reigning, a certain sort of you reign over creation. There's a certain, like, everything is in control, right? Well, that is the rest that is afforded from the girdle point, is kind of a Sabbath rest. And that's also a rest that I think creativity comes from, in composure, if you will. Composure. But with that, I will run. Thank you all. It's been a complete delight this evening. Thank you, Michael, Christian, Clayton. It's been a delight. Blessings to you and all the best.